situations where we got to experience some anti-Semitism. For example, we had students with who'd walk around campus with Hamas headbands. We had some vandalism.
Okay, when you say some, and let's start discussing now in English, okay? Because I want it to go fluent.
Yeah.
Because I want everything to be very punctual and accurate, okay?
Sure.
So just a minute, אני מצטער לכולם אם האנגלית שלי לא טובה, if my English is not good enough, but I'll do my best. Okay, so you're in Israel. Yeah, you're in Israel because you made Aliyah. You're Israeli warrior.
Yeah.
You went to political science in a university which the professors and the atmosphere is anti-Israeli. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There were some that were, at least maybe not pro, but not anti, and there were definitely some that were anti, and more students than professors in my experience. But first I'd like to say I can only speak about my personal experience. I don't want to.
So what is your personal experience?
Well, I came from a very Zionist background, and getting into a institutional setting where I felt that not just being a Jew but being pro-Israeli, being Israeli was somewhat a negative experience in a institutional sense. I mean, it wasn't something that I felt that you could advertise publicly. I mean, especially when you would go to the library and you'd actually see Hamas headbands on kids and
on the head.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and it was in
okay,
Arabic.
they can put their headbands
Right.
Hamas, but you can as well put a headband of blue and white flag. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, of course. It wasn't.
But you didn't do it.
I did at some, in the beginning, when I was a little more willing to engage in, political discourse. But at some point, it, you see the atmosphere, you experience what type of environment is allowed inside those institutions.
Stop a moment.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What do you mean by allowed in those institutions?
Well, for instance, for an example, we had BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, pass a student government law to essentially divest from associating with Israel or companies that do business in Israel. And, there were some things on comments by student leaders that essentially said this motion that passed was a victory for Hamas. And this was put on, I believe, their student social media. And there was a little bit of an outrage.
Why did they have the power and you didn't have the power?
Well, first of all, I was an older student. I was out of, the regular sort of matriculation. I came from Israel after the army, so maybe I wasn't I wasn't involved in student groups or wasn't leaders in those movements. But
okay.
I'm just the experience, the contrast from being in Israel, being in a kibbutz and being a soldier, and then all of a sudden being in an atmosphere that seemed to totally be against that.
Okay, so there is an atmosphere and noisy groups which are against Israel in Davis University or in every other...
From my experience, from talking to people, friends, family members in California who were also in other universities, it was pretty standard practice for these groups like SJP or MSA. This was standard operating procedure to...
Okay, what did it make you feel?
It was hostile, to a point where you weren't comfortable expressing yourself, expressing support. I mean, you do it anyway, but you definitely feel the pushback. I had some things said to me that was very troubling, especially when it came from
What are
professors.
they? What are they? What are the things?
You know, everything from like baby killers to murder. I mean, pretty horrible
you're a
things.
baby killer.
Yeah,
You are a baby killer.
you know, very very ignorant things. But it was the atmosphere that was sort of propagated for years by these groups that had agendas.
Did you have a
were
supporting
anti-Israel.
environment?
There was one or two places you could go where there was the Hillel House, obviously, but even
Within the campus.
yeah, there was the Jewish
Okay, yeah.
house of essentially a group for students. But even within that group, the Jewish group Hillel, there was debate on how pro or anti-Israel they should be publicly.
Okay.
So because they didn't want to create
They-
problems.
Why do these Hamas, supporters not create problems, and the pro-Israeli in the campus does create a problem? Being a pro-Israeli within the Hillel group,
Yeah.
which does have power because it's a group,
Yeah.
and if they speak up, it's a problem. And if those Hamas people or Hamas supporters, why is this not a problem? And this Jewish Israel supporting is a problem.
Well, you get into the concepts of politically correct culture that that propagate this idea that the oppressed should be able to express themselves in the way that they feel they would like to, and that means that they can express their anti-Israel, anti-Semitic views and sort of get away with it.
Because they are like underdogs,
Correct.
okay? And you are representing the big force
Yeah.
against
The little.
the little ones.
Right. Correct.
So this is the name of the game.
Yeah. And also, there just isn't as many of us as there are of them in these American institutions, these liberal colleges, especially ones, and when I say us and them, even within the Jewish community, there's variation in how expressive or even how supportive they are of Israel.
Okay, so another point, you're saying that the anti-Israel movement, BDS or whatever it is, okay, they are united in their power. No question marks.
Yes.
And in the Jewish community, there are, like, in Israel, or,
Yeah.
we are thinking people, there are
Right.
different opinions, and the ununification, did I say it correct? Unification or disunification, whatever.
Yeah.
How do you say it?
Well, the uniformity.
There's no uniformity.
Right.
Okay? In the Jewish part, it reflects on the power. Okay?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, we're definitely portrayed as being, the ones with, the power, at least an unequal power dynamic that favors Israel over,
Okay.
whoever we oppress.
Is it anti-Israel or anti-Israel policy? You understand my question?
Yes. Yes.
Our politics in Israel, because I'm anti-Israel policy,
know,
and I'm the biggest Zionist.
If I wasn't a pessimist and the cup was half full, maybe we could get away with saying it's only anti-Israel policy. But when you see what's going on in some of these classes, the talks by some professors, even outside of these radical student groups that despise Israel, I think it's safe to say that they're anti-Israel, not just its policies.
Not just its policy.
Yeah.
What do they say? I want my listeners to understand, what do the American, you said before broadcast, you said that 11 of 12 professors in the high universities, which is Yale, Howard, Davis, and
correct.
etc.
Yeah.
UCLA, most of them have an anti-Israeli policy, and that's what they reflect.
Well, I'm gonna have to walk that back a little bit because I don't remember the exact source, but there was a statistic floating around in some of my public policy classes that spoke to the demographics of the professors in California, and it was 1 in 12 professors in California. Only 1 in 12 are conservative. The other 11 would be considered liberal, and so that just shows you that there is a lack of diversity of thought.
Does a liberal American, isn't a liberal American anti-Israeli by definition, or he could be liberal and pro-Israeli in his or when I say pro-Israeli, which I mean believing in the right of Israel to live, to exist in this border or that border, okay?
Right. You know, from my personal experience, I would say definitely that the liberal frame of thought when it comes to Israel is usually in the negative. I mean, it's, you know, I don't want to make generalizations, but within my experience, that's my opinion.
And the liberals are mostly Democrats?
At the moment in, you know, American politics, you know, every few decades, American politics seem to switch sides from right to left, depending on, you know, geopolitics of the period. But at the moment, you see definitely an emerging, especially on the radical left, which is, you know, under the Democratic Party's umbrella at the moment.
But not the mainstream yet.
It's moving into the mainstream. I mean,
Sanders?
Bernie Sanders just recently at the JPOS convention, just recently, you know, said he would be willing to take some of Israel's military aid and send it directly to Gaza.
Yeah, to Gaza Strip.
You see personalities like Ilhan Omar and Tlaib. These are senators who have taken some pretty anti-Israel positions in the past, and it's becoming mainstream. They're getting more visible.
Okay. You know, we Israelis see America, United States of America, as a big supporter of Israel, and there is some thought that it will always be like that. I have a question mark on it. Okay, look, Europe, there's extreme left, there's right, there's not much place for the middle. By the way,
in America.
No, in Europe.
Okay.
In Europe, okay? In Israel, it's also not much place in the middle. Even if you're in the middle, the right wing says, hey, you're leftist. So the world is going and starting to be divided between black and white. I'm not saying that black is good and white is bad, okay?
Yeah.
But to polarization, okay?
Yeah.
Now, what I hear from you is America, United States of America, is going to polarization also. I tell you what I am concerned as an Israeli, that the extreme right is always anti-Semitism. And the left in the world is anti-Israel. So you have here a combination of anti-Semitism with anti-Israelism.
Yes. Well, I see you're making the distinction between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism.
I am making the distinction.
And I think that's a very nuanced position that can be lost on people who are not, totally educated or exposed to both sides. So, in America, we had a lot of news about, how Russia abused Facebook and other social media to influence the election in 2016. From talking, but
are you joking?
No.
They're influencing everything, every election in every country.
I brought that up as an example because through my experience with talking to these younger students about Israel and Israeli policy, that they were just as influenced through social media, through Palestinian propaganda. And you don't really hear too much about that. You hear all this stuff about Russia, but you never hear about the same sort of tactics being used for anti-Israel agenda. And through Facebook, they're not just targeting voters who are adults, they're targeting children who are just as much, if not more, susceptible to manipulation.
Okay, because they're working long term. If not this election, next election, there. Okay, yeah.
So when I was in school or university in 2016, 2017, most of the students who were of the appropriate age were telling me about what they saw in 2014 and 2012 on Facebook and MySpace and things, and how horrible it was. And as we now come to acknowledge that these aren't the best sources of actual information. So there's multiple avenues of expressing anti-Israel propaganda to students, to young people, and we're seeing that manifest now in liberal policy making, which is in the Democratic Party largely.
Okay, what we're hearing from you is not very optimistic.
No, it's pretty troubling, considering for the past few decades, being pro-Israel was a bipartisan position where both parties pretty much supported, the state of Israel. And now we're seeing, as you said, hyper politicized, polarized, hyper partisanship within American politics because of the two-party system. Now it's become this political football that can hurt, Israel within American politics, because it's no longer a bipartisan position.
Okay, as a former or a graduate of politics science in the United States of America, in Davis, one of the 20th biggest universities in the United States of America, what do you forecast, if you can forecast, the U.S.-Israeli relationships long term? I'm not speaking only of that Trump administration, okay? Long term.
To be hopeful, I would say, American policy in regards to Israel will pretty much stay mainstream, and that it will be an ally for Israel for the near future, if not for a long time. Will the dynamic change if there's a Democratic president that's elected in 2020? I think that's pretty clear. How negative or how much change or reform there will be within that alliance is what we're going to have to wait and see.
Is negative anti-Israel, or is negative anti the policy that Israel practices nowadays? Do you understand?
But through my personal experience, I would say that would be hard to I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know can't see the future, but I can only go on what these politicians are saying now, and it sounds like they're willing to exert their influence to change, if not Israeli policy, the way Israel is looked upon in American society in general.
I'm speaking about society, okay? Because politicians will do whatever their voters are for, okay?
Right.
So, society, we spoke about polarization, okay? And in the aspect of polarization, we spoke about the extreme right, anti-Semitism, I said, and the left, anti-Israeli, okay? Now, there's something in the middle that we don't hear about, which is probably the glue that will keep the power of the relationships between America and Israel. Where is this glue?
Well, there's definite
Am I accurate in the question?
Yes, there's definite societal and cultural characteristics that are shared between the two countries. Israel's a relative new country. By no means is it perfect, or is any country perfect, but I do wholeheartedly believe it's, as a political system, it's the best in the region as an open society, or as open a society could be under the circumstances. Ability to practice religion, freedom, expression,
Expression.
I definitely right.
Freedom, okay. Expression, I'm not sure.
No,
As an Israeli, I'm not sure we
guess
have the freedom of expression.
I guess I'll have to defer to your experience in that, but
You know what's happening today?
tell me.
Reporters are betrayers.
Yeah.
Everybody, no, I don't want to speak about it. Then I'll be a extremist, and your father will be angry at me, and all that.
So,
But in America, I'd say
I guess
America,
it's all relative.
America, also the freedom of speech is going down.
To a degree, I mean, how so, would you say?
How so? If somebody is anti Trump, okay?
Yeah.
He also says today he's a betrayer.
You
Same
know-
as we have here. It's either you're with us or you're an enemy. This is a part of the polarization.
True, but as social media becomes more available, freedom of expression also expands. So if someone is able to say negative things about Trump, we see on his Twitter account that he is just as free to say negative things about them.
But how much will listen to a Trump tweet
Right.
or to Kevin Wiel tweet?
Sure. but
Okay, who
Trump
has more
isn't?
exposure?
Yeah, Trump isn't the only, celebrity or official that's on Twitter. They all have pretty big followers to some degree. But it's not like in Turkey where journalists are thrown in jail for saying nasty tweets, or
Not
in
yet, not
Jordan
yet.
where you can't
Not yet. No,
criticize
Jordan,
the king.
Okay, yeah,
things like
criticize
that.
the king.
Do you know how many people would be in jail if tweeting bad things about Trump was illegal? Half the country.
He would like it.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
yeah. But I think that's just the evolution of expression, right? It's more available. It's it's, if you want it, it's there.
I'm afraid that it may be, correct me if I'm wrong, but leaders, let's say leaders like Putin, Trump, Netanyahu, Erdogan, I see them in the same packet, by the way, okay? The Hungarian leader, I don't know. They're the same material.
Yeah.
I mean, their desire is to lower public expression. Answer me now as a mate of.
Did you put Trump in that group?
Of course, he's a
Okay.
leader.
So,
Trump,
okay.
Putin, Bibi, Erdogan, and the Hungarian. All these five. You can argue with me until the end.
I don't want to
of
argue
course.
with you. Listen, I didn't vote for Trump. It
No,
doesn't mean I voted for Hillary. I voted independent in 2016
Okay.
for Gary Johnson. It doesn't mean I think Trump is a good person by any means, but I don't want him to fail.
No, I'm not speaking about
right.
Trump. Okay,
Yeah.
for me, all these five people.
Right.
Yes. He's my prime minister. He's your president. The other guy, Trump and Bibi. With Erdogan, with Putin, with the Hungarian. You know what? Maybe with this British new guy. I don't remember what his name. They're
Boris
all
Johnson.
Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Right wing, which I don't have problem. Right wing is okay. Left wing is okay. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
as long as you're for the people, you're for the people. But all these guys want to lower by law
Yeah.
and by extreme public press, okay? Just a minute. סליחה, אתם מוכנים בבקשה להוריד את הכל? וואו.
Just as a side note, another an anecdote for that. When you say Putin and Erdogan and all these totalitarian or authoritarian leaders who have pretty repressive rules, I mean, maybe Trump is in the same sort of sphere of personalities, but
he's leading it, in my opinion.
Okay, but
you can argue with me. It's okay.
Let me tell you a personal story. When Trump was elected, I had an English professor at UC Davis who essentially called him Hitler.
That's an exaggeration, which I would put him to jail on it.
Right. That's the sort of thing I was dealing with at that time, and so I'm sort of cautious on that sort of association with totalitarian dictators.
Yes, but you don't have to take totalitarian to Hitler, or
right. But that's how he is portrayed in certain.
Okay, is Putin totalitarian in your vision?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, can you compare him to Hitler?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
So if Putin you can't, Trump you can't. But they're made of the same.
There might be some
and Bibi also.
Personality. I mean, even to say personality similarities, it feels sort of gross to me. But that's my personal opinion. But yeah, that was the sort of things that were said about Trump in these essentially government-funded institutions about a government official. That this was a horrible person. This was a Hitler.
Now, okay, you see what happens when we're talking about opinions and different opinions,
right?
And which is legitimate,
right?
Then people take the polarization to Hitler.
Right.
And it's not in America only, it's also here in Israel, okay? Which some people call the extreme right as Hitlers, as Nazis,
right.
And the extreme right and their extreme rights call the lefts as Nazis also, which that is a polarization. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's difficult. It's difficult, especially to have conversations like this one now in the regular sort of political dialogue in America at the time.
It's my way or the highway, huh?
Well, it's so people create their own bubbles of information, and they surround themselves with like-minded opinions, and if you disagree with that, you can essentially be dismissed or not acknowledged. So yeah, it's definitely a symptom of hyper-partisanship, hyper-political polarization, and it's pretty unfortunate that that's the level of discourse we're at.
Okay. As we are an Israeli radio station here in Israel, and we have our own agenda, okay? Let Israel live and be strong for always, okay? And yes, United States of America has some small influence on the security, and let Israel be always strong. And there is a strong Jewish movement. You said you Jewish people in the United States of America are not united.
No.
But
yeah, there's no Jewish pope, unfortunately. Right?
No Jewish pope.
Yeah, pope for the Jews.
Yeah, you are. Okay. How can we make a Jewish pope?
It's that old saying.
We need a Jewish pope.
What's the old saying? 10 Jews and 12 different opinions, that sort of thing.
No, 20.
If we had, but there's no central figure. There's no leader of the Jews.
But let's take. I want to take an example. You are in Davis University. You are Jewish. You're a Zionist. You believe in Israel. You are an Israeli warrior in the Nachal. You had people who believed exactly in what you believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or you were the only one in all the campus
No,
of
I wasn't
Davis?
the only one. I believe there might have been a handful of like-minded people like me, but handful?
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
Even within the Hillel House, the Jewish group that was
Handful. Just a minute. I want to hear. This is a statement. In all the Davis University campus, which is how many people?
from my
10,000.
from my experience, I don't know if I was the biggest social butterfly. I didn't get out to meet everyone on campus.
Okay.
But from the people that I met that were pro-Israel, there was even a debate on how supportive should we be in public. So
Okay, stop. How supportive should we be in public? Why? Because it will harm me personal, or because I don't really believe in it?
that's a good question. I mean, I thought.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was. Well, my take from it was they didn't want to draw attention to themselves
Because
for whatever reason.
socializing, being
Yeah.
a part of everyone.
It sort of makes you an outcast in the social ecosystem of the university experience. It's pretty rare to have out and out pro-Israeli students, and there wasn't. There were groups, there were pro-Israel groups, but they would put on specific
Agenda.
Right.
Like,
You wouldn't see the average student walking around really with a big Israeli flag hanging out their backpack, that sort of thing.
okay, let's think about future a little, okay?
Mhm.
What should people which have your view,
Mhm.
and I don't believe it's a handful,
Yeah.
really, I mean, all Davis, 8,000,
Well,
10,000 students.
For example, let me
Give me a break.
Let me
Not
tell you a
handful.
story. So there was a speaker from Israel who came that was protested by SJP students for justice in
Yeah.
Palestine, and I started talking to some people after the disruption about like how we should have responded, and I suggested maybe we should have there was more of us at that time in this discussion
frame.
group,
Okay.
in the in the room
Yeah.
where we were having this discussion. At the time, there was more of us than the protesters. And
Okay.
I said maybe we should start singing, Am Yisrael Chai, and sort of drone them out so we don't have to hear them. And a couple people said no, they didn't like that idea. We shouldn't be confrontational. We shouldn't, inhibit their ability to express themselves. That sort of thing. It was.
Oh, so you're too soft in the middle, like
Well, that's what I got from this.
Paul. What's the singer name? No, soft in the middle. Garfinkel, Art Garfinkel.
Okay.
Soft in the middle now. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just one example of how pro-Jewish groups have an internal debate on how to respond to the anti.
So if these Jewish groups,
Yeah.
if you 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
would be more aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Yeah.
and put like a knife between your teeth,
Right.
would it affect?
Yeah, I think I would have I mean, personally, I think that would be. I would definitely support that. I think that would be a positive development on American campuses, but there isn't. I don't see that happening. I mean, there are a few groups. There's I think reservists on duty or something like that. That's a campus group that's becoming more. And as the issue of anti-Semitism in American campuses is becoming more public, there is a pushback against it. So hopefully in the future, we will start being a little more forceful or purposeful in our demonstrations and expression.
Another question.
Yeah.
These BDS, all these anti-Israelis, they have a backup outside of the campus. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
It comes from out of campus into the campus. It has to be some power, some source of outside.
Yeah, there's
yes or no?
I definitely would agree with you. There's a definite political agenda that's being imported, but also
And supportive and pushed
yeah,
and motivated.
yeah. I mean, they
Okay.
get their funding.
They get the funding, they get the okay. What about you guys? Does the state of Israel, okay, have you ever felt you have support from outside from the state of Israel into the campus in terms of financing, supporting in what to say, how to attack, making workshops?
From my limited participation in those groups, I wasn't a leader in any of the pro-Israel groups, but yes, I saw some outreach. There were Israeli speakers, there were pro-Israeli international groups that came, but again, you got to talk about the numbers and their effectiveness in spreading that message.
Do you really believe that numbers are the things who affect?
Well, in political discourse in America, it's usually, who can scream the loudest.
Okay, so it's not a matter of number. Take in Israel, for example. Who are the ones who have the most political powers?
Tell me.
Settlers.
Yeah.
How much are them? Few. But they have a lot of power. Because they're united to scream out, and they are managing the politics in Israel, even though they are minority.
Yeah, the people on the extremes usually are the most vocal in any circumstance.
So
that's why they're on the extremes usually, right?
The answer is to be an extreme pro-Israeli?
It's maybe when in the age of extremism being a sort of a bad word, I guess it's how it's applied, but maybe extreme is too much of a loaded expression.
Not
or
extreme
term.
in ideas. Okay, I don't. I like
Right.
Like we talked before. I like the middle way, Rambam, Buddha.
Right.
But to express yourself in extreme way, even though you're in the middle, maybe that's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as an American Jew, the experience of Jews in America, it's always been to sort of not make waves, not make noise, try and, keep your head down and just,
The Jewish
make it
way
through.
in Europe in the beginning of the 20th century, which led to the Holocaust.
Right. And that's a hard habit to break, I think, especially.
Every habit is hard to break.
Right. Right, unfortunately. But, that's what... that's an issue that American Jews definitely have to deal with.
How can we help him here, you guys from Israel?
How
can we help you to help us?
Right. Well, it's I guess it's cyclical in that sense, but getting the resources, getting the type of strategies and tactics to negate these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic movements that are really flourishing at the moment. I think the recent statistic of hate crimes in America is like the majority are against Jews, even though the Jewish population in America is like 2%. So it's pretty incredible.
Just a minute, 2%, but what's the percent of influence?
Well, I think that may be debatable.
How much percent in the Congress?